After winning the lottery, I decided to hide it from my entire family. I asked for help, and only one person reached out to me. My name is Maya, and I'm 34 years old. If you saw me walking down the street, you'd probably forget my face within minutes. Average height, brown hair usually pulled back in a ponytail. Clothes from discount stores that fit well enough. I'm the kind of person who blends into crowds, which has always suited me fine. I work as an accountant at Morrison & Associates Marketing, a mid-sized firm downtown where I spend my days reconciling budgets and tracking expenses. My boss Linda has this habit of dumping last-minute projects on my desk just as I'm packing up to leave, and I always stay late to finish them. That's what I do. I'm reliable Maya, dependable Maya, the one who never complains. My apartment reflects my financial reality perfectly. It's a one-bedroom unit in an older building where the radiator clanks all winter and the air conditioning barely works in summer. The carpet has seen better decades, and most of my furniture comes from relatives' hand-me-downs or garage sales. My greatest luxury is a small flat-screen TV I saved up for 2 years to buy. But every Tuesday, like clockwork, I stop at Murphy's Corner Store on my way home from work. Old Mr. Murphy smiles as I approach the lottery counter, already knowing my routine. The usual? He asks, though he already knows. $5 worth, I confirm, watching him print my tickets. 5 precious dollars that could go toward groceries or gas, but instead goes toward those little slips of paper covered in numbers. They represent hope in my otherwise predictable life. My family thinks I'm foolish. During our monthly dinners at Mom's house, obligations disguised as celebrations, someone always brings up my gambling problem. $5 a week adds up, my sister Amanda says, adjusting her diamond bracelet. That's over $250 a year you're throwing away. Easy for her to say. Amanda married Dr. Richard Pemberton straight out of college and now lives in a house with more bathrooms than I have rooms. She drives a luxury SUV and gets weekly manicures. But somehow my $5 lottery tickets are the family's biggest financial concern. My brother Derek isn't much better, though his criticism comes from a different angle. You know the odds are basically impossible, right? He says, usually right before asking to borrow money for his latest business venture or rent, because his band isn't taking off as quickly as expected. Even my divorced parents temporarily unite in their disapproval of my weekly ticket purchases. Mom married George, a retired postal worker who's nice but uncomfortable with our family dynamics. Dad married Patricia, a widow whose grown children treat our side like distant relatives. Despite their criticism, I'm always the one they call when money gets tight. When Mom needed help with George's medical bills, I scraped together what I could. When Derek's band equipment was stolen, I lent him money I couldn't spare. When extended family faced unexpected expenses, my phone would ring. I never say no. Even when it means living on pasta for 2 weeks or walking to work because I can't afford gas, I find a way to help. That's who I am. The responsible one, the reliable one, the one who makes things work even when my own bank account runs on empty. My 2019 Toyota Corolla with its dented bumper and sticky passenger door perfectly represents my life. It isn't pretty or impressive, but it gets me where I need to go. Most days, that feels like enough. I have dreams, of course. Secret dreams I never share during family dinners. Dreams of traveling, maybe going back to school, having enough money to not constantly worry about money. But dreams feel like luxuries I can't afford, so I keep them tucked away like lottery tickets in my wallet, waiting for the right moment to check them against reality. Understanding my family requires a roadmap, and it's messier than anyone wants to admit. Our monthly gatherings aren't heartwarming traditions. They're social experiments where 2 separate households converge at Mom and George's house, creating awkward blended family dynamics that never quite blend. When my parents divorced after 30 years of marriage held together by habit, everything shifted. Dad married Patricia, who treats our side of the family like obligations. Mom married George, a decent man who seems perpetually uncomfortable with the chaos he inherited. Amanda arrives at every gathering like she's gracing us with her presence. Living in her world of country club memberships and charity galas, she's forgotten what it's like to worry about money. We're renovating the guest bathroom, she'll announce. Richard thinks Italian marble is the way to go. Meanwhile, I'm calculating whether I can afford name-brand cereal. She has 2 kids in private schools that cost more annually than I make. She casually mentions violin lessons, equestrian camps, and college prep like these are normal expenses. When she looks at me, I see pity mixed with subtle superiority that makes my skin crawl. Derek is the eternal optimist who's been about to make it big for a decade. His band, the Static Rebels, keeps him working part-time jobs while chasing musical dreams. Derek has charm that makes people believe in him, including me, which explains how I've lent him money more times than I can count. This next gig could change everything, he says, and I find myself reaching for my checkbook again. It's never for frivolous things, always rent, equipment repairs, or crucial opportunities requiring small investments. Derek promises to pay me back with genuine sincerity that convinces me every time. The extended family adds more complexity. Uncle Frank, Dad's brother, made a fortune in real estate and never lets anyone forget it. He drives luxury cars and takes expensive vacations, but mysteriously disappears during family emergencies. His wife Carol collects designer handbags while complaining about property taxes. Cousin Jennifer works in insurance, makes decent money, but lives beyond her means. She shows up discussing shopping sprees while quietly asking for grocery help until payday. Then there's Aunt Rose, Mom's older sister, who stands apart from this complicated web. She's a retired elementary school teacher living modestly in a small house across town. While everyone discusses financial ups and downs like dinner conversation, Rose quietly listens, occasionally offering wisdom we're too caught up in drama to appreciate. Rose never married, dedicating her life to teaching and caring for aging parents. She lives on her pension and Social Security, driving a car older than mine, shopping with Sunday paper coupons. But she has this contentment I envy, peace that comes from knowing exactly who she is. What strikes me about family gatherings is the unspoken scorekeeping. Everyone mentally tracks who's doing well, struggling, or owes what to whom. Money is both endless conversation and underlying tension coloring every interaction. I'm the family's unofficial bank. When Amanda needed down payment help, I emptied my savings. When Derek's equipment was stolen, I put replacement costs on my credit card. When relatives faced medical bills or car repairs, they knew I'd find ways to help, even when I had to sacrifice. But help only flows one way. When I had car troubles or missed work while sick, everyone was too stretched to assist. They'd express sympathy and suggest I be more careful with money or find better work, as if these hadn't occurred to me. During these dinners, I'd catch Aunt Rose watching family dynamics with knowing eyes. She'd catch my gaze and give small smiles that seemed to say she understood something the rest didn't. My 34th birthday fell on a Tuesday, which felt perfectly fitting. Tuesdays were lottery days, so celebrating another year of ordinary life on my weekly rebellion day seemed poetic. The day was unremarkable. Linda piled extra work on my desk as if she'd forgotten my birthday. I spent the afternoon reconciling messy accounts while my phone buzzed with generic birthday texts. Amanda's cake emojis, Derek's promise to call later, and a sweet note from Aunt Rose inviting me to weekend dinner. At Murphy's Corner Store that evening, I decided to do something different. Instead of random numbers, I chose ones that meant something. Mom's birthday, Aunt Rose's age, the date Derek and I learned to ride bikes, Amanda's anniversary, even our childhood home address. Feeling lucky today? Murphy asked, handing me the tickets. It's my birthday, I said, as if that explained anything. Well, happy birthday. May this be the year everything changes. His words would prove prophetic. I went home to my empty apartment, heated leftover Chinese takeout, and settled with wine in front of my TV, my one birthday indulgence. The lottery drawing wouldn't air until 11, so I watched a mindless romantic comedy, trying not to think about spending my birthday alone. When the drawing started, I almost didn't pay attention. This routine had become so automatic I barely watched anymore. But something made me look up as numbers were called. The first matched, then the second. By the third, my heart started racing. Fourth number matched, then the fifth. When the sixth and final number was called, I stared at my ticket in complete disbelief. I checked again, then again. I grabbed my laptop and verified on the official lottery website. $47 million. I had won $47 million. My first instinct was calling someone to share this incredible news. I reached for my phone to dial Amanda, then stopped. Something held me back. Maybe all those years as the family ATM, or some instinct I didn't understand yet. Instead, I spent hours researching what happened to lottery winners. What I found made my stomach turn. Story after story of families destroyed by sudden wealth, winners sued by relatives, people crawling out with outstretched hands, fortunes lost within years because they couldn't say no. There was the Ohio woman whose sister sued for half the winnings, claiming they'd agreed to share any wins. The Florida man whose son tried having him declared mentally incompetent to control the money. The New Jersey couple who went bankrupt after 5 years, having given away so much they couldn't manage what remained. But one story haunted me most. Patricia, who'd won $86 million and immediately told her extended family, thinking shared fortune would bring everyone closer. Instead, it destroyed relationships built over decades. Relatives who'd never spoken became best friends long enough to ask for money. Family gatherings turned into negotiation sessions. People who'd once loved her saw her as nothing but a funding source. Patricia ended up cutting contact with most family and moving across country, but damage was done. She'd given away so much trying to make everyone happy that she'd compromised her own security. In interviews, she said the saddest part wasn't losing money. It was learning some people only valued her for what she could give. Reading these stories in my quiet apartment, clutching my winning ticket, I realized I faced a choice defining the rest of my life. I could announce my win and watch family dynamics change forever, possibly destroying relationships. Or I could keep this secret and use it wisely, protecting both money and people I cared about. The more I thought, the more I realized this windfall represented something bigger than money. It was an opportunity to discover who my family really was, not who they claimed to be, but who they truly were when faced with someone else's need. As dawn broke, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't telling anyone about the lottery win. Not yet. First, I was going to find out who my family really was. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 8 years. I had more important things to do than balance someone else's books. At the lottery office downtown, I presented my ticket to a bored-looking woman who'd clearly seen it all before. After verification, she handed me paperwork and rehearsed congratulations. "You'll want financial and legal advisors before deciding on payout," she said. "We have recommended professionals if you'd like." I took the list but had already decided to do my own research. I wasn't trusting anyone else's recommendations for something this important. The next 3 days were a crash course in wealth management. I took more sick days, claiming flu, and spent hours researching estate attorneys specializing in privacy protection. I read about trust structures, tax implications, and asset protection until my eyes burned. I settled on Catherine Morrison, a lawyer specializing in lottery winners. Her downtown office was in a glass tower I'd never had reason to enter. She was younger than expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and competent air that put me at ease. "You're smart keeping this quiet," Catherine said after I explained my situation. "Too many winners tell everyone immediately before processing what this means for their lives." We spent 2 hours discussing options. Catherine recommended a revocable trust allowing me to claim the prize anonymously, protecting my identity from public records and media attention while giving me control over who knew when. "The lump sum after taxes will be approximately $28 million, she explained. "That's still life-changing, but understand the real number you're working with. $28 million. Even after taxes, more money than I'd imagined in wildest dreams." Catherine introduced me to David Chen, a financial advisor specializing in sudden wealth management. David made complex concepts sound simple and understood psychological aspects of sudden wealth. "Money itself isn't the challenge," David explained. "The challenge is how it changes relationships and self-perception. You'll discover things about people in your life that might be difficult to accept." Together, we developed a comprehensive plan. Most money would be invested conservatively, generating enough passive income for comfortable living without touching principal. A smaller portion would be set aside for charitable giving and potential family assistance. Most importantly, the plan included maintaining my current lifestyle while figuring out next steps. Catherine advised continuing work temporarily to avoid suspicions. David suggested keeping my old car, apartment, everything signaling nothing had changed. "This gives you time to think clearly," Catherine said. "You can observe how people treat you when they think you have nothing versus how they might treat you knowing the truth." The trust was established within a week. Officially, the prize had been claimed by the Mountain View Foundation, a name Catherine suggested that sounded institutional and boring. Money was safely invested, paperwork filed, and to the world I remained the same struggling accountant. But internally, everything changed. I walked, slept, even breathed differently. There was constant awareness of living a double life. At work, I balanced others' budgets while sitting on unimaginable fortune. At family gatherings, I listened to money troubles and financial stress, while knowing I could solve everyone's problems with one phone call. The secret's weight was heavier than anticipated. Every conversation felt like performance. Every interaction filtered through this new reality I couldn't share. My apartment looked the same but felt different. The secondhand furniture and worn carpet didn't bother me anymore because I knew they were temporary. The dented car didn't embarrass me because I was choosing to drive it. But the hardest part was loneliness. I'd gained financial security beyond wildest dreams, but lost ability to be genuinely spontaneous with anyone. Every relationship came with questions about what would happen if they knew the truth. That's when I started developing the plan that would change everything. The plan took shape over a week, refined during lunch breaks and finalized during evening walks. It was elegantly simple, which made it feel both perfect and terrible. I would tell my family I'd lost my job at Morrison and Associates. Not just any job loss, but sudden downsizing that left me scrambling. I'd say the accounting department was restructured, and I was let go with minimal severance, struggling to find work in a competitive market. Then the crucial part, I would ask to borrow $5,000 to tide me over. It wasn't a fortune, but enough that helping would require genuine sacrifice from most family members. It was also an amount that couldn't be easily dismissed or forgotten. What made this revealing was that I'd helped most of these people with similar or larger amounts over years. I'd given Amanda $3,000 for her down payment. I'd lent Derek nearly $4,000 for band expenses. I'd helped with medical bills, car repairs, and emergencies for cousins, uncles, even parents. The plan's beauty was its simplicity. I wasn't asking for anything I hadn't already given. I wasn't requesting help beyond what they could reasonably provide. I was simply asking them to reciprocate support I'd offered when they needed it. But I needed someone to talk to. Someone outside family drama to help process what I was about to discover. That someone was Jenna, my best friend since college, and the only person completely separate from my family complications. Jenna worked as a graphic designer, lived 30 minutes away with her husband and 2 kids. She was the friend who remembered birthdays without Facebook reminders, who'd drive across town with soup when you were sick. Most importantly, she was brutally honest when honesty was needed. I asked her to meet at our usual spot, the Daily Grind Cafe downtown. We'd been meeting there for years, working through everything from career changes to relationship troubles over lattes and pastries. "I need to tell you something," I said after we'd settled into our corner booth, "but promise not to judge me too harshly for what I'm about to do." Jenna raised an eyebrow. That's not a promising conversation starter. What's going on? I took a deep breath and told her about winning the lottery. Her eyes widened, narrowed, then widened again as full implications hit her. Holy shit, Maya. $47 million? Are you serious right now? Keep your voice down, I whispered, glancing around the cafe. Yes, I'm serious, but that's not the part I need you not to judge me for. Then I explained my plan. I watched Jenna's expression change as I laid out my intention to test family by pretending to need help. You want to lie to your entire family about losing your job so you can see who will lend you money? She said slowly. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. It sounds manipulative, she said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than accusatory. But I get why you want to do it. Do you think I'm horrible? Jenna stirred her latte thoughtfully. I think you're someone who's been taken advantage of for years, trying to figure out who actually cares about you versus who just sees you as convenient help. But this could backfire spectacularly. What if you find out things you don't want to know? What if this ruins relationships permanently? Maybe some relationships need to be ruined, I said. Maybe some were already ruined and I couldn't see it because I was always giving. Jenna leaned back, studying me. You've changed since winning this money. There's something different about you. More determined, I guess. The money didn't change me. It gave me options I never had before, including the option to find out the truth about people. Okay, Jenna said finally. If you're determined to do this, I'll support you. But I have one condition. What's that? You don't do this alone. You call me after every conversation and we process it together. This can mess with your head, and you'll need someone to help you stay grounded. I felt grateful for her friendship. Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that. I started with my parents, figuring they'd be most likely to help, and success would give me confidence for harder conversations ahead. I called Dad first Thursday evening when I knew he'd be home from the hardware distribution center. Hey, Dad, do you have a few minutes? I need to talk about something. Sure, sweetheart. What's going on? I launched into my rehearsed story about layoffs at Morrison and Associates, how the entire accounting department was restructured, and how I was struggling to find work in the current market. I kept my voice steady but added enough stress to make it believable. That's tough, honey, Dad said. These companies don't care about loyalty anymore. After 8 years, you'd think they'd give more notice. The thing is, Dad, I'm getting desperate. My savings are running out faster than expected, and I've got rent and car payments coming. I was wondering if maybe you and Patricia could help with a loan. Just $5,000 to get me through until I find something? There was a pause. A long pause. $5,000? Dad's voice became cautious. Maya, that's a lot of money. Patricia and I are saving for our trip to visit her daughter in Colorado, and we've got our own expenses. I know it's a lot. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't really struggling. You know I've always been responsible with money. Well, maybe we could help with a few $100s. But $5,000? That's just not realistic right now. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling punched in the stomach. A few $100s. From the man I'd helped with $2,000 when his roof needed emergency repairs last year. I called Mom next, hoping for different response. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," Mom said after hearing the same story. "But you know George worries about his own job security. The Postal Service keeps talking about cuts, and we're trying to be really careful with spending. I understand, but I'm really in a bind. Could you maybe help with part of it? Even a couple thousand would make such a difference." "Maya, you know we would if we could, but we just can't take that financial risk. Have you thought about unemployment benefits? Or maybe part-time work while you're looking?" Unemployment and part-time work. These were her suggestions for the daughter who'd helped with George's medical bills 6 months ago. Amanda was next. I called Saturday morning, knowing she'd be home from weekly yoga class. "Maya, I'm so sorry about your job," she said with seemingly genuine sympathy. "Richard and I were just talking about how unstable the market's become." I explained my financial situation, emphasizing how careful I'd always been and how this was truly emergency. $5,000, Amanda repeated slowly. "Maya, you know we'd love to help, but we've got kids' tuition payments coming. And Richard's thinking about expanding his practice, so we need cash reserves available for that investment." "Amanda, you know I helped with your down payment years ago. I'm not asking for a gift, just a loan until I'm back on my feet. That was different. That was investment in our future. And we did pay you back. Eventually. Eventually. It had taken 3 years and multiple reminders. I just don't think we can take on that obligation right now. But have you considered selling your car? You could probably get enough for a down payment on something less expensive and use the difference for expenses." Sell my car. The suggestion came from someone driving a luxury SUV costing more than I made yearly. By Sunday evening, I'd called 6 family members. Derek at least sounded genuinely upset he couldn't help. "God, Maya, the timing sucks so bad. The band just spent everything on new equipment for upcoming gigs. If you'd called next month, I might have done something." Next month. Always next month with Derek. Uncle Frank was direct in rejection. "Maya, you're young and capable. This is exactly when you need to figure things out on your own. It builds character." Character. From the man who'd asked me to co-sign his boat loan 3 years ago. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial sympathy, followed by careful explanations why helping wasn't possible, then suggestions for how I could solve my own problems. People who'd come to me when they needed help suddenly became financial advisors, full of wisdom about budgeting and personal responsibility. That Sunday night, I called Jenna as promised. "It's worse than I thought," I told her, unable to keep hurt from my voice. "I'm sorry. How are you holding up? I feel like I've been living in a fantasy about who these people really are. All these years, I thought I was part of a family that looked out for each other. But it turns out I was just the designated helper. Maya, I hate to ask this, but have you called everyone yet?" "There's one person left," I admitted. "Aunt Rose. But honestly, I'm almost afraid to call her." "Why?" "Because she's the one person I genuinely respect in this family. And if she disappoints me too, I don't know how I'll handle it." "Maybe that's exactly why you need to call her," Jenna said. Monday evening, I dialed Aunt Rose's number with trembling fingers. She answered on the second ring, voice warm and familiar. "Maya, dear. What a lovely surprise. How are you?" I went through my story again, but somehow it felt different telling it to her. Maybe because I genuinely cared about her response, or maybe because she listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and concern. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished. "That must be so scary for you. You've always been so responsible and hardworking. The thing is, Aunt Rose, I'm really struggling financially right now. I was wondering if there was any way you could help me with a loan. I know it's a lot to ask, but I need about $5,000 to get through the next couple months." There was no pause this time. No hesitation. "Of course I can help you," she said immediately. "I don't have $5,000 in my checking account, but I have about $3,000 in savings that I can transfer tomorrow. And Maya, you can stay here with me if you need to. I've got that spare bedroom that never gets used." I was so shocked I couldn't speak for a moment. "Maya, are you there? Dear?" "I'm here," I managed. "Aunt Rose, I can't take your savings. That's probably everything you have put away." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "What good is money sitting in the bank if it can't help someone I love when they need it? You've been there for everyone else in this family, Maya. It's time someone was there for you. But what about your own emergencies? What if something happens and you need that money? Then I'll figure something out, just like you're trying to figure something out now. That's what family does for each other." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not the frustrated tears from other calls, but something deeper and more complicated. Relief, gratitude, shame, and profound sadness that it had taken this elaborate deception to discover who really cared about me. Tuesday morning, Aunt Rose called back. "Maya, I've been thinking about your situation all night," she said. "I called the bank first thing this morning. I can get you $3,500 today, and I should be able to manage another $1,500 by week's end." "Aunt Rose, no, I can't let you empty your entire savings account for me. You're not letting me do anything," she said with gentle laugh. "I'm choosing to do this. There's a difference." That afternoon, she drove to my apartment in her ancient Honda Civic with the retired teacher. "Every child was my child" bumper sticker. She handed me an envelope with $3,500 in cash. "I wanted to bring it in person," she said, "so I could give you a proper hug and tell you everything's going to work out." As Aunt Rose hugged me in my living room, I realized I was facing a moral crisis I hadn't anticipated. Here was this wonderful woman, sacrificing her financial security for someone she loved, and that someone was lying to her about needing help. "Aunt Rose," I said as we sat on my couch, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "Why didn't you hesitate? Everyone else I called had reasons why they couldn't help, but you didn't even pause to think about it." She was quiet for a moment, looking out my window at the parking lot where her old car sat next to my dented Corolla. "Do you know why I never married, Maya?" I shook my head. "It wasn't because I never fell in love. I did, several times. But I learned early that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by watching how they treat people who can't do anything for them in return." She turned to look at me directly. "I've watched you your whole adult life, Maya. I've seen you help people who never said thank you, lend money to people who forgot to pay you back, and show up for family members who were conveniently busy when you needed support. You give because you care, not because you expect something in return. But how do you know I'm not just like everyone else? How do you know I wouldn't disappoint you if our situations were reversed?" Aunt Rose smiled and patted my hand. "Because, dear one, I've been watching. And in 40 years of teaching, I learned that character isn't what people do when they think someone's paying attention. It's what they do when they think no one is looking." I couldn't sleep that night, knowing Aunt Rose's savings account was $3,500 lighter because of my deception. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her writing that check with such confidence, such love, such complete trust in someone who was lying to her. Thursday evening, I drove to her house. It was a small bungalow built in the 1950s. With a garden full of vegetables and flowers she tended herself. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a retired teacher. Bookshelves everywhere, comfortable furniture that had seen decades of use, walls covered with artwork from former students. "Maya," she said, opening the door with a smile. "What a wonderful surprise. Come in, dear. I was just making some tea." We sat in her living room, surrounded by evidence of a life spent caring for others. Thank you cards from students, photos of children who'd visited years after graduation, small gifts speaking of relationships maintained long after classroom connections ended. "Aunt Rose," I began, hands trembling as I held my teacup, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Her expression became serious, but she nodded encouragingly. "I lied to you about losing my job. I lied to everyone. I still work at Morrison & Associates, and I'm not in any financial trouble." I watched her face carefully, expecting shock or anger, but she simply set down her teacup and waited for me to continue. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery, $47 million. After taxes, it's about $28 million. I hired lawyers, set up trusts, invested the money, and decided not to tell anyone in the family. Aunt Rose's eyebrows rose slightly, but she still didn't speak. I wanted to find out who really cared about me, not just who needed something from me. So I made up this story about needing help, and I asked everyone for $5,000. Everyone except you found reasons why they couldn't help, even though I've helped all of them with similar amounts over the years. My voice started breaking as I continued, but you didn't hesitate. You offered me your entire savings account, and you did it with such love and generosity that I realized I'd become someone I didn't want to be. Someone who would test people she cares about instead of just trusting them. "I'm returning your money, Aunt Rose. I'm sorry I lied to you, and I'm sorry I made you question your own financial security because of my deception." For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then Aunt Rose began to laugh. Not bitter laughter, but something warm and knowing. "Oh, Maya," she said, wiping her eyes. "You poor dear. What a weight you've been carrying. You're not angry?" "Angry? Honey, I'm proud of you." "Proud? I lied to you. I manipulated you. You tested people who had given you every reason to doubt their loyalty. she said gently. And when you realized your test had hurt someone who didn't deserve it, you chose honesty over convenience. That takes courage. She leaned forward and took my hands in hers. Maya, can I tell you something about your family that you might not realize? I nodded, still feeling ashamed. I've been watching these dynamics for decades, long before you were old enough to understand them. Your parents, siblings, cousins, they love you, but they've never learned to show love through sacrifice. They've always known you would be there when they needed help, so they never had to develop the muscles required to help others. That doesn't excuse their behavior. No, it doesn't. But it explains it. You've been so reliable, so consistently generous, that they started taking you for granted. They began seeing your help as a given rather than a gift. Aunt Rose stood and walked to her kitchen, returning with homemade cookies. I've been thinking about this since I gave you that money, she said. Something about your situation didn't feel right to me. Not because I doubted you needed help, but because it seemed out of character for you to ask for it. You knew I was lying? I suspected something was going on, she admitted. But I also knew that whatever was really happening, you needed something from me. Maybe not money, but something. So I gave you what you asked for and trusted you'd tell me the truth when you were ready. I stared at her, amazed once again by her wisdom. Aunt Rose, what should I do about the rest of the family? Should I tell them the truth? That depends. What do you want to accomplish? I want them to understand how their behavior affects other people. I want them to know that relationships can't be one-sided forever. And do you think telling them about the lottery will accomplish that? I thought about it. No. I think it would just make them angry and defensive. They'd focus on the deception instead of examining their own actions. Then maybe there's another way to have that conversation? What do you mean? Aunt Rose smiled. You don't have to reveal the lottery to confront them about their responses to your request for help. You can address the real issue, the fact that they weren't there when you asked for support, without getting into the complexities of your financial situation. You think I should tell them I found another solution to my money problems? I think you should tell them exactly what you've learned about reciprocity in relationships. Whether that includes the lottery is up to you. The monthly family dinner was scheduled for Sunday at Mom's house. I spent the week planning what I would say, how to address what happened without revealing the full truth about my financial situation. I arrived with different energy than I'd ever brought to these gatherings. Instead of the usual nod of anxiety, I felt calm and purposeful. I had information now, data about who these people really were, and that knowledge was both painful and liberating. Everyone was already there when I walked in. Amanda showed off photos of her kids' latest achievements, while Derek tuned his guitar in the corner. Adults made small talk about work and weather while George grilled burgers on the back patio. Maya, Mom called from the kitchen. How are you doing, honey? Any luck with the job search? This was my opening. Actually, I have good news about that, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I found something. It's a better position than I had before, with a significant salary increase. The room buzzed with congratulations and relief. Dad patted my shoulder. Amanda hugged me. Derek called out, "Way to go, sis," from across the room. That's wonderful, dear, Aunt Rose said, giving me a knowing look. I'm so happy everything worked out for you. Actually, I continued, my voice still carrying across the room, I want to talk to everyone about something while we're all together. Conversations died down as people turned their attention to me. I could feel my heart beating faster, but my voice remained steady. A few weeks ago, when I told you all about losing my job, I reached out asking for help. Specifically, I asked to borrow $5,000 to get me through until I found new work. I could see some people shifting uncomfortably, probably remembering their responses. I want to be clear that I understand everyone has their own financial obligations and concerns. I'm not angry with anyone for not being able to help. This was technically true, though not the whole truth. But the experience taught me something important about our family dynamics that I think we need to discuss. Dad cleared his throat. Maya, if this is about... Please let me finish, Dad. This is important. He nodded, looking uncomfortable. For the past 10 years, I've helped various family members with financial emergencies. I've given money for down payments, medical bills, car repairs, business investments, and day-to-day expenses. I've never asked for interest, never demanded repayment schedules, and never made anyone feel bad for needing help. I could see Amanda exchanging glances with her husband, and Derek had stopped strumming his guitar. When I found myself in trouble, I called 7 different family members asking for help. Only one person offered to assist me, and she offered to give me her entire life savings. All eyes turned to Aunt Rose, who smiled serenely and continued eating her potato salad. The rest of you, People I've helped with thousands of dollars over the years found reasons why helping me wasn't possible. And that's your right. But it's also information about what kind of relationships we actually have. Maya, Amanda said, her voice tight. That's not fair. You know we would help if we could, but the timing was just… Amanda, 3 years ago, I gave you $3,000 for your house down payment. It took 3 years to pay me back, and you never once apologized for the delay. Last month, you spent more than $5,000 on your kitchen renovation. Amanda's face flushed red. That's completely different. That was planned spending, not an emergency loan. You're right, it is different. When you needed help, it was an emergency. When I needed help, it was an inconvenience. Derek put down his guitar. Maya, come on. You know I would have helped if I could. The band just… Derek, I've lent you money 4 times in 2 years, almost $4,000 total. You've paid back about half, usually months late, never without me asking first. I always pay you back eventually, he protested. Eventually isn't the same as reliably. When I needed help, you said maybe next month. I turned to Dad. Dad, last year when your roof leaked, I gave you $2,000 for emergency repairs. No questions asked, no payment plan. When I called for help, you offered a few hundred and suggested unemployment benefits. The weeks following that family dinner brought a clarity I'd never experienced before. It was as if I'd been living my entire adult life wearing glasses with the wrong prescription, and suddenly everything came into sharp focus. The first major decision I made was to leave Morrison and Associates. Not dramatically or vindictively, but professionally and definitively. I gave Linda 2 weeks' notice and trained my replacement thoroughly. You've been so reliable, Maya. I always thought you'd be here forever, she said as I cleaned out my desk. That's exactly why I needed to leave, I replied. With Catherine Morrison's help, I established the Rose Garden Foundation, named after the woman who had shown me what unconditional love looked like. The foundation's mission was to assist elderly individuals struggling financially, particularly retired teachers and other public service workers who had dedicated their lives to helping others. David Chen helped me structure the foundation's finances conservatively. We allocated $2 million initially, with investment income funding operations and grants. It wasn't flashy or headline-grabbing, but it would make a real difference in people's lives. The first person I helped through the foundation was Aunt Rose herself, though she didn't know it at first. I discovered through careful research that she'd been struggling with increasing medical expenses related to her arthritis and had been rationing medications to make them last longer. The foundation approved a medical assistance grant for her, officially because she met our criteria as a retired educator with demonstrated financial need. When she called to tell me about the unexpected help, I could hear the relief in her voice. Maya, the most amazing thing happened, she said. There's this foundation that helps retired teachers, and they're going to cover my medical expenses for the whole year. Can you believe that? That's wonderful. Aunt Rose, you deserve that kind of support. 6 months after leaving my job, I bought a modest house 3 blocks from Aunt Rose. Nothing extravagant, a 2-bedroom ranch with a small yard and updated kitchen. To anyone observing, it looked like a reasonable upgrade for someone with a new, better-paying job. Aunt Rose was delighted to have me as a neighbor. We started sharing dinner twice a week, alternating between our houses. She taught me to garden, and I helped her with technology and household repairs becoming difficult for her arthritic hands. The foundation work gave me a sense of purpose I'd never had in accounting. We helped retired teachers with medical expenses, assisted elderly individuals with home repairs, and provided emergency grants for people facing unexpected crises. Every month, I reviewed applications and met with beneficiaries, seeing firsthand how modest assistance could transform someone's situation. An elderly man who could finally afford hearing aids, a retired librarian who could repair her car and maintain independence, a former social worker who could buy diabetes medications. It was deeply satisfying work, but more than that, it felt aligned with who I really was and who I wanted to be. My family relationships had definitely changed. Amanda called a few weeks after the dinner to apologize, sort of. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, and I want you to know Richard and I really would have helped if we could have. The timing was just really difficult. I understand, I'd replied, though I didn't entirely believe her. Our relationship now was polite but distant. She still sent birthday texts and Christmas cards, but the automatic assumption that I would be available for whatever she needed was gone. Derek had been more honest in his response. I've been a shitty brother when it comes to money stuff, he'd admitted during a phone call. I always just assumed you were better at handling things than I was, so it was okay for me to be irresponsible because you'd figure it out. I'm not your backup plan anymore, Derek. I know, and I'm trying to do better. To his credit, Derek had started managing his finances more responsibly. He'd gotten a steady part-time job in addition to his music and had even paid me back $200 without being asked. 1 year after that transformative family dinner, I was sitting in my garden on a warm Saturday morning, reviewing grant applications for the Rose Garden Foundation. The morning sun filtered through the oak tree I'd planted in spring, and I could hear Aunt Rose humming while she worked in her yard next door. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. What started as a quiet effort to help retired educators had expanded into comprehensive support for elderly individuals facing financial hardship. We'd assisted over 200 people in our first year, and word was spreading through communities about the help available. "Maya," Aunt Rose called over the fence, "come see what's blooming in my rose garden." I set down the applications and walked over to admire the spectacular display of pink and yellow roses she'd been nurturing all season. At 72, she moved more slowly than a year ago, but the foundation's medical assistance had made an enormous difference in her quality of life. Her arthritis medication was covered, she'd afforded physical therapy, and she'd even splurged on ergonomic gardening tools. "They're beautiful," I said, admiring the blooms. "You have such a gift with these plants." "I've been thinking," she said, settling onto her new garden bench. "Another discreet foundation gift through our home modification program. You should consider expanding the foundation's work to include job training for older adults who want to return to work." This was classic Aunt Rose. Even while benefiting from the foundation's assistance, she was thinking about helping other people. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Band got selected for the Summer Music Festival, playing 3 shows in July. Wanted you to be the first to know." I smiled as I typed back, "That's amazing. So proud of you." Derek's transformation over the past year had been remarkable. After our family confrontation, he'd taken a hard look at his financial habits and started treating his music career like a business. He'd kept his part-time job, created a budget, and had even started saving money for equipment purchases instead of borrowing it. "I'm making dinner tonight," I texted back. "Want to come over and tell me more about the festival?" "Yes, can I bring anything?" This was another change. The old Derek would have shown up expecting to be fed and entertained. The new Derek offered to contribute. Amanda and I had found a new equilibrium that was more honest, if less close than before. She'd invited me to her daughter's dance recital the previous month, and I'd gone, genuinely enjoying the performance. "Maya, I've been reading about your foundation online," she'd said during our last conversation. "It's really impressive what you're accomplishing." "Thank you. It's become a real passion project for me." I was wondering if there might be ways for Richard and me to get involved, maybe volunteer work or fundraising support. The offer had surprised me, but I'd appreciated the gesture. Amanda was trying to contribute rather than just consume, and that felt like real progress. My parents had also made efforts to rebuild our relationship on more equal footing. Dad had started calling regularly, not because he needed anything, but to maintain connection. Mom had invited me to lunch several times, one-on-one conversations where she seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences. The foundation work had introduced me to an entirely new community. I'd met other foundation directors, retired professionals who volunteered their time, and social workers who helped us identify people needing assistance. It was a network built around shared values rather than shared genetics. That evening, as Derek, Aunt Rose, and I shared dinner in my kitchen, I reflected on how different my life looked compared to a year ago. Same neighborhood, but everything else had changed. The anxious, people-pleasing woman who had bought those lottery tickets was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and insisted others recognize it too. "Maya," Aunt Rose said as we cleaned up after dinner, "I hope you know how proud I am of the woman you've become." "I had a good teacher," I replied, meaning it completely. "We taught each other," she said with that wise smile I'd come to love. That's what real family does. As I watched Derek help Aunt Rose to her car that evening, I realized the lottery win had ultimately given me something unexpected: the ability to build the family I'd always wanted from people who truly deserved to be in it. 2 years after buying those life-changing lottery tickets, I'm sitting in the same coffee shop where I'd first told Jenna about my win, but everything else about my world has transformed beyond recognition. The Rose Garden Foundation has become a regional model for elder assistance. With satellite programs opening in 3 neighboring states, we've helped over 600 individuals, and our volunteer network includes more than 200 people donating their time and expertise. Jenna asked me a question that's been haunting me for weeks. If you had to do it all over again, would you still buy those lottery tickets? It's profound because winning wasn't just about gaining money. It was about losing innocence. The naive woman who believed her family loved her unconditionally was replaced by someone who understood that love often comes with conditions and limitations. Aunt Rose, now 74, remains the cornerstone of my chosen family. Her health has stabilized thanks to consistent medical care, and she's become the unofficial grandmother figure for several foundation beneficiaries who don't have family nearby. She started teaching weekly cooking classes for seniors. Combining her love of nurturing with practical education, she still doesn't know about the lottery win, and I've decided she never needs to. Our relationship is perfect exactly as it is, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than financial obligations or secrets. Derek has become someone I'm genuinely proud to call my brother. The Static Rebels has built a solid regional following and actually makes money now. More importantly, Derek developed into a responsible adult who manages finances, maintains steady employment, and contributes meaningfully to relationships. He recently started dating a music teacher named Lisa, and watching him navigate this relationship with maturity has been remarkable. Last month, he asked for my advice about proposing. Not financial assistance, just thoughts on whether he was ready for marriage. "I want to make sure I can be the partner she deserves," he'd said, a statement unthinkable from the old Derek. Amanda and I have settled into a relationship that's cordial but distant. She's made genuine efforts to be more reciprocal, remembering my birthday, asking about my work, even volunteering occasionally for foundation events. But there's underlying wariness between us now, acknowledgement that our relationship was damaged by years of imbalanced expectations. We'll never be as close as we once were, but we've found sustainable dynamics that allow us to be sisters without the toxicity that characterized our previous relationship. My parents have both made significant efforts to rebuild our connection on equal terms. Dad calls every Sunday now, conversations focusing on checking in rather than asking for anything. Mom started inviting me to regular lunches, one-on-one time where she seems genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences. The most unexpected development has been my relationship with James, a retired social worker who volunteers as our foundation coordinator. He knows nothing about my lottery win. To him, I'm simply Maya, the foundation director who somehow found resources to create this organization. He's attracted to my passion for the work and my commitment to helping others. James proposed last month during a volunteer appreciation dinner, doing it publicly in front of all the people whose lives we'd touched together. I've struggled with whether to tell him about the lottery before we marry. Catherine Morrison has advised creating a prenuptial agreement protecting the foundation's assets while providing for James appropriately. But perhaps the most important transformation has been internal. The woman who used to say yes to every request has been replaced by someone who sets boundaries and maintains them consistently. I've learned that saying no to inappropriate requests isn't cruel. It's necessary for healthy relationships. The lottery money sits in carefully managed investments, generating income that funds our foundation work while preserving principal for future generations. I live comfortably but not extravagantly, in the same modest house near Aunt Rose. My greatest luxury is freedom. Freedom from financial anxiety, toxic relationships, and freedom to spend time on work aligning with my values. These freedoms are worth more than any material possession. The lottery win didn't change who people were. It simply revealed who they had always been. Amanda had always been self-centered. The test just made it visible. Derek had always been irresponsible. The crisis highlighted patterns I'd been too generous to acknowledge. But Aunt Rose had always been loving and generous. If I could change anything, I wouldn't change buying those tickets. Winning that money, confronting my family, or establishing boundaries. All those experiences led me to this life, surrounded by people who value me authentically, where my work makes meaningful difference, and where I wake up every morning knowing exactly who I am and what I stand for. The lottery win gave me something more valuable than money. The ability to discover that my worth isn't determined by my usefulness to others, but by my own inherent value as a human being. And that understanding has made me truly rich.
After my left me 3 times, I married another, and she begged me to come back. "Eliza, would you come with me?" The wedding hall fell into complete silence. As I stood there stunned, with the ring halfway onto Eliza Monroe's finger, her long-lost love, Julian Hart, stood up yet again, shouting across the room at her. "Eliza, I'm here to take you away. Will you come with me?" Without a moment's hesitation, Eliza pulled her hand away from mine, lifted her dress, and walked gracefully toward Julian. Tears glistened in her eyes, filled with an emotion I hadn't seen before, as if Julian were the one she was meant to marry today. And there I stood, the actual groom under the glaring spotlight, reduced to nothing more than a clown in a suit. With conviction, Eliza extended her hand to Julian, her voice ringing loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Julian, I will." It couldn't be more evident. Eliza Monroe, the woman I loved, had been swept away by her long-lost love, Julian Hart. But I didn't feel angry. Instead, there was a strange sense of inevitability. After all, this was the third time in a month that my wedding had been interrupted by Julian. I let the ring fall from my hand, its imprint digging sharply into my palm. No one moved to stop them, not even Douglas and Vivian Monroe, who sat unmoving at the head table. I just stood there, watching their little drama unfold. The first time Julian crashed our wedding, I was furious. I shouted at him with every ounce of rage I had. This was supposed to be Eliza's and my day. I had planned it meticulously, and I couldn't let him ruin it. Red-eyed, I rushed to tackle Julian, intent on stopping him from stealing the woman who'd promised to be my wife. But our relatives blocked my path. Julian, standing protectively beside Eliza, smirked and said, "See? He flies off the handle at the smallest thing. He's bound to hurt you one day. Be glad I'm testing this for you. Otherwise, think of how much you'd suffer in the future." In that moment, the crowd turned against me. Their whispers painted me not as the groom, but as the villain. The voices surrounding me scolded me, saying it was just a test, and I had overreacted. It ended with me handing out a few hefty checks, and Eliza reluctantly agreeing to marry me again. The second time, I didn't shout. I didn't lose my temper. I fell to my knees, holding Eliza's dress, pleading with her not to leave. I loved her, and I recounted every single reason why. Julian pointed at me, disdainful, pathetic. "You think you can manipulate Eliza with this show of weakness? You're just a coward. What do you bring to the table besides clinging to her?" Once again, I was judged and condemned. Everyone there was one of Eliza's friends or relatives. I had no family, no one to stand by me. The verbal onslaught came from every side, and Eliza simply nestled into Julian's embrace, a sweet smile on her lips. Anger wasn't enough. Begging wasn't enough. Everything I did was wrong, so I chose to do nothing. I stood in silence, watching Julian's voice cut through the room once more. "See, Blake Carrington doesn't even care enough to fight for you. How could you marry a man like that? He's failed all 3 tests. He's not worth marrying." Anger failed. Pleading failed. Indifference failed. "What do you want me to do?" Eliza's eyes flicked back to me, and she threw the bouquet at my chest. "Blake, what are you doing just standing there? I'm being taken from you. You don't care at all? Do you? You never loved me." Her expression was a mixture of rage and frustration, but I merely brushed off the flowers clinging to my suit, straightened my tie, and walked toward the MC, taking the microphone from him. "Eliza, go. This wedding is over." When I finished speaking, the entire wedding venue fell into silence. Everyone assumed Eliza Monroe had me completely under her control, that no matter what she did, I wouldn't end things. Eliza snapped out of her shock quickly, her eyes narrowing. She grabbed a champagne glass and threw it at me, soaking my custom suit, one I had bought specifically for this day. "Blake Carrington, have you lost your mind?" she shouted. "How dare you say the wedding is off? You've got some nerve. You didn't even pass a single test, and now you say something like that. Tests, a single wedding costing tens of thousands of dollars. Dresses, photography, the MC, flowers, venues. 3 weddings costing millions in total." I laughed bitterly. Every cent came from me. Oh, so they were tests, not real weddings. Fine. All 3 weddings came to $450,000. Pay it back. Can you do that? Eliza's face fell. She couldn't possibly pay it back. Every doctor, every piece of jewelry she owned I paid for. The house her parents lived in, the car they drove, even their jobs at my company, they all came from me. She wouldn't be able to come up with that money, no matter what. The luxurious life Eliza enjoyed was funded solely by me. But none of that mattered to her. Instead, she doubled down, eyes blazing as she grabbed another glass and hurled it at me. "Spending money on me is a privilege. What do you have besides a pile of cash you think that will tie me down? And now you dare to demand it back? I'll make you regret it." With that, she stormed out, wedding gown trailing behind her, and Julian Hart followed close, casting a triumphant smirk my way. As they exited, I watched, a hollow feeling taking root in my chest. 5 years of love, and this was who she really was. I glanced down at the wedding band still pressed into my palm, its outline sharp against my skin, and finally the tears fell. Eliza and Julian had been together before. When her family fell from wealth, Julian had walked away. That's when I came in, loving her fiercely, supporting her through everything. When she accepted me as her partner, I thought my love had won. Then Julian came back from overseas, ruining everything in an instant. Eliza fell for him again without a second thought. She stopped caring about me, my objections, everything except my money. She only cared about Julian. She used my love as a pawn for his gain, trampling over my feelings and dignity. The relationship had been decaying for a long time. I'd just been too naive to see it. I reclaimed the money I had given to her parents as a bride price and told the MC to clear the guests from the hall. I changed out of my soaked suit, grabbed my car keys, and prepared to head home when one of Eliza's relatives grabbed my arm, sneering. "Blake, so when's the next wedding?" he said, laughing at my expense. They thought it was a joke, that I would never truly leave her. I said nothing, walking straight to my car. There wouldn't be another wedding. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more. After that final scene, I walked out of the hall feeling empty, but without a trace of regret. With each step I took, the image of Eliza and Julian leaving together gnawed at me, making me relive every moment I'd invested in that relationship. I had given everything to see her happy, to build a stable future by her side, and she threw it all away without blinking. The worst part? I was surrounded by people who not only watched, but supported every humiliation she put me through. That's when I realized I had been nothing more than an investment to her, a convenient sponsor who financed her vanity and the comfort of her entire family. When I got home, I sat on the couch with my phone in hand. False apologies began to flood in from her family. "Blake, I know everything seems confusing right now, but Eliza still loves you. Give her another chance. She's just confused." Confused? Was she confused while she exchanged vows with Julian in the middle of our wedding ceremony? I laughed at myself, a bitter and cold laugh, as I blocked each of their numbers. I didn't want contact with anyone who saw me as a fool. The first step was to sever any financial ties. The next morning, I went straight to the bank and transferred all joint accounts to my name. I called my accountant and had her credit cards canceled. No warnings, no explanations. Not another cent would go to Eliza or her parasitic family. I also terminated the lease on her parents' house, and the car they drove was returned to the dealership. They were so used to luxury that they never thought to work or save, always assuming I would cover everything. Within days, desperate messages from Eliza started to come through. First, there were the apologies, filled with empty words and promises I knew to be false. Then came the veiled threats. "You can't leave us out on the street like this, Blake. Not after everything I did for you." I simply ignored them. Then she tried to manipulate me, claiming it was my fault for not being strong enough to pass the tests, that all of this was her way of ensuring our marriage would be solid. What kind of woman puts a man through this kind of humiliation 3 times? Mocking him in front of everyone just to test his love. Her relatives also began to pressure me, showing up at my office, yelling in the parking lot, demanding that I reconsider and get back together with Eliza. They looked at me as if I were some heartless monster for leaving them without their luxurious lifestyle. I started questioning how I'd ever let people like that into my life. But then Eliza switched tactics. She decided to sue me, claiming she was entitled to part of my wealth since I had supported her for years. That was the last straw. I sat down with my lawyer, explained the situation, and he couldn't believe it. "Blake, she's literally trying to squeeze more money out of you after everything she's done. If it's war she wants, let's give it to her." And that's exactly what we did. I gathered proof of every cent I had invested in her and her family. The 3 wasted wedding ceremonies, expensive gifts, the dowry, even her parents' medical bills. I documented every expense, every transfer, everything I'd ever done for that ungrateful family. The court hearings were a spectacle. Eliza showed up with Julian as if his presence could intimidate me. In a desperate attempt to discredit me, she tried to portray our relationship as abusive, claiming I had financially manipulated her, when all I'd ever done was provide what they couldn't afford on their own. During the trial, Eliza cried, playing the victim, claiming I had ruined her life by cutting off financial support. Julian, beside her, kept that same smug smile, as if this was just another victory. But with my lawyer's help and all the evidence I'd gathered, we were able to dismantle each one of her lies. In the end, the judge ruled that Eliza wouldn't get a single cent of my money. On the contrary, she was ordered to pay back a small portion of what I had spent on her and her family, which I knew she could never afford. Julian, who had looked so confident, began to lose his expression of arrogance as the sentence was read. He seemed to finally realize that the privilege of spending my money was, in fact, quite costly. I left the courthouse feeling a massive weight lifted from my shoulders. For too long, Eliza and her family had taken everything they could, and now they would have to deal with the consequences of their greed. Her parents, without my support, were soon evicted from their luxurious home and had to return to the tiny apartment where they had lived before I came into their lives. Eliza tried to keep up appearances, but soon the photos of fancy restaurants and international trips disappeared from her social media. Julian, her one true love, slowly started to drift away. Without the indirect financial support he'd been enjoying, he lost interest. Not long after, I heard rumors that Eliza was working at a small cafe, struggling to maintain even a semblance of her former life, while Julian simply disappeared. As for me, I finally found peace. I decided to travel, focus on my career, and enjoy life without leeches draining me dry. Eliza attempted to contact me a few times. I ignored every message, every attempt at reconciliation. She never admitted fault, but it didn't matter anymore. I watched from afar as she reaped the consequences of her own actions. And that's how, in peace and with a new life ahead of me, I finally moved on without looking back. The days after the trial brought me a strange calm, yet the feeling of injustice lingered. After everything Eliza and her family had put me through, their downfall didn't feel like enough. They lived like parasites, exploiting anyone who showed them the slightest generosity. And until now, they had always come out unscathed, ready to latch onto their next victim. This time, I was determined to change that. I didn't just want to cut off any source of money they might get from me. I wanted them to experience what it was like to lose everything, to hit rock bottom. First, I reviewed every document and contract that still tied me to Eliza and her family. Every loophole, every potential connection they could use to reach me or try to reverse the court's decision. I went through it meticulously and shut it down. Next, I turned my attention to those who had backed her up in court and helped shape her false image as a victim. The lawyers and friends who supported the absurd narrative that I financially controlled her became particular targets. I hired an excellent private investigator to dig up information on each of them. Gradually, their inconvenient secrets came to light. I found them engaged in shady dealings, favors, and other dishonorable acts. They were small errors, but I knew precisely where to share this information to create significant damage. Within months, Eliza's friends and allies began losing positions, contracts, and inevitably, respect. As for her parents, when I learned they had returned to their cramped and deteriorated apartment, I took it further. I discovered that they had never paid any fees or taxes while living in the house I rented for them. With a few calls and the right connections, a substantial bill was soon sent directly to their new address. And, as expected, they had no means to pay it. The result? Within weeks, they were threatened with eviction. Without wealthy friends to turn to or supportive relatives willing to help, they were on their own. They finally felt the weight of a reality they'd ignored while comfortably living off me. But for Eliza, I wanted something deeper. I knew her pride still kept her from facing what she'd truly lost. She'd always been obsessed with public image, with the status my position and money provided. So, I went after everything that could ruin her reputation. First, I ensured that her debts to me were registered and publicly exposed. Without knowing it, she ended up on a blacklist within our city's social circles. Invitations to important events stopped arriving, which, for someone like Eliza, was unbearable. And with discreet help from influential friends, I made sure her financial troubles were well known among those she used to associate with. She quickly went from glamorous socialite to a labeled opportunist who had finally gotten what she deserved. Little by little, Eliza tried to appear at smaller social events, accompanied by a new suitor each time, hoping to restore her image and perhaps find another investor to support her. But I was ready for this. Each man she got involved with started receiving anonymous tips about her relationship history and the court case she faced. These messages detailed every humiliation she put me through, every scandal, and every public loyalty test that turned my love into a public mockery. As expected, none of her suitors lasted long. They walked out of her life before she could even try to milk any money or support from them. Eliza soon realized her reputation was ruined, and that the chances of finding anyone willing to bankroll her lifestyle again were virtually zero. In one last act of desperation, she reached out to the few friends she had left. But they, too, were aware of her story, and now, without my financial support, she had nothing of value to offer them. And so, within a few months, Eliza became nearly invisible. Her once glamorous presence was reduced to that of a destitute woman, unable to accept that her days of luxury and power were over. I knew Eliza had hit rock bottom when I received a message from her, begging me to meet her one last time. Curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet, but this time, I was completely in control. I found Eliza in a simple cafe, and when I saw her, I barely recognized her. She looked worn out, her eyes tired and hollow, dressed in clothes she would never have dared wear before. The proud look she always carried was gone, and before me sat someone unrecognizable, broken, as if seeing herself for the first time. "Blake, please," she started, her voice trembling. "I know I made mistakes, that I was proud and maybe even unfair. But we had something real, didn't we?" I chuckled softly. The irony of hearing those words from her was almost too much to bear. "Something real?" I asked, with a calm that unsettled her. "You threw away anything real the moment you put me through your tests, Eliza. To you, I was just a way to maintain the life you wanted. Nothing more." She lowered her gaze, the mask she had maintained finally crumbling. I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused, Julian." She stopped, the mention of his name seeming to hurt her. "I made mistakes, but I'm willing to change, Blake. I just need a chance. We can rebuild everything, go back to how we were." I smiled one last time. "I spent years believing you were my partner, that we were building something together. But you used every moment, every drop of love I had, just to feed your own ego. And you know what's funny, Eliza? I really did love you. And because of that, I forgive you." She lifted her eyes, a flicker of hope lighting up in them, but I wasn't finished. "But forgiving you doesn't mean I'm taking you back. It only means I can move forward without the shadow of what you did to me." I stood up, leaving her there without looking back. From that moment on, my life took a new direction. I left the past behind and used every lesson I had learned to build something real and solid for myself. At peace, I walked toward the future, knowing that the sweetest revenge wasn't watching her suffer, but knowing she could no longer ruin anyone else's life the way she tried to ruin mine.
During dinner, my mother-in-law laughed at me and said that if I disappeared tomorrow, no one would miss me. I'm going to tell you something that might sound familiar, but I promise you, every word is true. My name is Louise, and 8 years ago, I thought I had found my forever. You know that feeling when you meet someone and suddenly the future makes sense? That was me and David. We had this shared vision of building something beautiful together. A home, a family, a life that would make all those romantic movies seem pale in comparison. Those first few years were everything I had dreamed of. We'd spend Saturday mornings planning our future kitchen renovations, arguing playfully about whether to get a golden retriever or a chocolate lab, and lying in bed talking about baby names until we fell asleep laughing. David was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely excited about our shared dreams. We bought our first house together when I was 26 and he was 28, a charming 2-bedroom with a picket fence that needed painting and a garden that begged for someone to care about it. But somewhere around our 5th year together, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small changes that I convinced myself were normal relationship evolution. David started checking his phone more during our conversations. He became less enthusiastic about our weekend projects. When I'd suggest painting the guest room that we'd always planned would become the nursery, he'd find reasons to postpone it. "Maybe next month," became his favorite phrase. The change was so gradual that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. You know how it is when you're living inside something. You adjust to each small shift until one day you wake up and realize you're in a completely different relationship than the one you started with. That's exactly what happened to us. I remember the exact moment I first felt truly alone in my marriage. We were at Home Depot, looking at paint samples for that guest room we'd been talking about for months. I was excited, holding up different shades of soft yellow and sage green, explaining how we could make it gender neutral but still warm and welcoming. David was standing next to me, but he might as well have been on another planet. When I asked his opinion, he just shrugged and said, "Whatever you think is fine." That phrase, "whatever you think is fine," became the soundtrack of our relationship. It was his response to everything from dinner plans to vacation ideas to major life decisions. At first, I thought he was being supportive, letting me take the lead. But gradually, I realized he wasn't being supportive at all. He was checking out, leaving me to carry the weight of our shared dreams alone, while he slowly backed away from everything we had planned together. Looking back now, I can see that 5th year was when David started building walls I didn't even know existed. But at the time, I just tried harder, thinking that if I could be patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough, we'd find our way back to those Saturday morning conversations about our future. I had no idea that our problems were about to get so much worse, or that the man I thought I married was about to show me exactly who he really was under pressure. If only I had known then what I know now, that some people retreat from love when it gets real, and that all the patience in the world can't change someone who doesn't want to grow up. By year 6, we had officially started trying for a baby. I remember how excited I was the first month we decided to stop using protection. I had visions of surprising David with a positive test, maybe hiding it in his coffee cup or wrapping it up as a little gift. But month after month, my period would arrive right on schedule, and each time felt like a small death of hope. After 8 months of trying naturally, my doctor suggested we run some tests. Nothing major, she assured us, just routine blood work and a few examinations to make sure everything was functioning as it should be. I was nervous but optimistic. David seemed supportive, holding my hand during appointments and asking the right questions. For a moment, it felt like we were a team again. The tests revealed that I had some minor hormonal imbalances that could be affecting ovulation, but nothing that couldn't be treated with medication and monitoring. The doctor was encouraging, explaining that many couples face similar challenges and that with the right treatment, our chances were very good. I left that appointment feeling hopeful for the first time in months. But fertility treatment is not for the faint of heart. The hormone injections made me emotional and physically uncomfortable. I had to go in for blood draws and ultrasounds every few days, tracking my cycle with scientific precision that sucked all the romance out of the process. David started treating our scheduled intimacy like a chore, often sighing heavily or checking the time when I'd tell him the fertility app said it was the right moment. "This doesn't feel natural anymore," he complained one evening after I'd reminded him that we were in our peak window. "It's like we're machines following a schedule." I tried to explain that this was temporary, that once we got pregnant, things would go back to normal. But David seemed to shut down more with each passing month. The man who used to hold me when I cried about negative pregnancy tests started staying late at work during my most emotional days. He'd come home to find me crying over another failed cycle and just pat my shoulder awkwardly before disappearing into his home office. After 18 months of treatments, 3 failed IUI procedures, and countless negative tests, I suggested we take a break and consider IVF. Our doctor had mentioned it as the next logical step, explaining that it would give us better odds and more control over the process. But when I brought it up to David, the conversation changed everything between us. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he said quietly, not even looking at me. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd once planned our future, and he was delivering what felt like a death sentence to our dreams. "This whole process is consuming our entire life. We never talk about anything else. You're always upset about something. Either the medications are making you sick, or you're devastated about another negative test, or you're researching new treatments online until midnight." I stared at him, feeling like he'd slapped me. "You're giving up? Just like that?" "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Maybe we're not meant to have kids. Maybe we should focus on what we do have instead of chasing something that might never happen." But here's what really broke my heart. It wasn't just that David was ready to give up on having children. He was giving up on us. He stopped asking how my appointments went. He stopped pretending to care when I got excited about a new treatment option. He even stopped touching me except for the scheduled times. And even then, he seemed like he was just going through the motions. I found myself facing not just infertility, but the crushing realization that the man I'd married wasn't willing to fight for our dreams when things got difficult. While I was pushing through the physical and emotional toll of treatment, hoping we'd come out stronger on the other side, David was already mentally checking out of our marriage. The worst part was the silence. We stopped talking about the future entirely. That guest room remained unpainted, a constant reminder of the family we weren't building and the husband who had decided it was too hard to keep trying. Just when I thought our marriage couldn't get more complicated, David's mother called with what she described as a health scare. Patricia, that's David's mom, had been having some dizzy spells, and her doctor wanted to run more tests. She was scared to be alone, she said, and could she possibly stay with us for a few weeks while she figured things out? I should have said no right then and there. My gut told me this was a mistake, but David was already saying, of course, that family comes first, and that we had plenty of room. What could I do? Say no to a sick mother-in-law? So I smiled and agreed, even as every instinct screamed that this was going to be a disaster. Patricia arrived on a Tuesday morning with enough luggage for a month-long vacation. Just the essentials, she explained, directing David to carry in box after box of her belongings. She immediately started rearranging our living room furniture, explaining that the couch wasn't positioned properly for her back problems, and that she'd need the television remote kept nearby because her medications made her tired. Within the first week, I realized that Patricia's health scare seemed to conveniently disappear whenever she wanted to do something she enjoyed. She was too weak to help with dishes, but perfectly fine to spend hours on the phone gossiping with her sister. She couldn't possibly cook for herself, but had the energy to criticize every meal I prepared. "Louise, dear," she'd say with that fake sweet voice that made my skin crawl, "don't you think this chicken is a little dry?" David's father, God rest his soul, always said I made the most tender chicken. Maybe I should show you my secret. David would light up whenever his mother praised her own cooking or offered to help me in the kitchen. He never seemed to notice that her help always came wrapped in criticism, or that she managed to make me feel incompetent in my own home. Instead, he'd encourage her suggestions, saying things like, "Mom always did make amazing chicken," or "Maybe you could teach Louise that recipe." The few weeks turned into a month, then 2 months. Every time I gently asked about her health or her timeline for going home, Patricia would suddenly feel dizzy or mention that her doctor wanted her to avoid stress. David would immediately jump to her defense, reminding me that she was going through a difficult time and that we should be patient. But here's what really started to drive me crazy. Patricia wasn't just staying in our house, she was taking it over. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets because this layout doesn't make any sense. She replaced my bathroom towels with her own because mine were too rough. She even moved the furniture in our bedroom because she could hear David and me talking at night, and it was disturbing her sleep. Every morning, I'd wake up to find something else changed. My coffee maker moved to a different counter. My favorite reading chair pushed into a corner. My decorative pillows replaced with her knitted cushions that smelled like old perfume and mothballs. When I'd mention these changes to David, he'd shrug and say his mother was just trying to be helpful, that I was being too sensitive. The worst part was watching David transform back into a 12-year-old boy whenever his mother was around. He'd ask her permission for everything: what to have for dinner, what to watch on television, whether he should work late or come home early. He started deferring to her opinion on everything from our finances to our weekend plans. I felt like a stranger in my own home, married to a man who seemed more interested in pleasing his mother than supporting his wife. And Patricia? She was just getting started. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes every time David chose her comfort over mine, every time he agreed with her criticism of me, every time he failed to defend our marriage against her subtle but constant attacks. 3 months into what was supposed to be a few weeks' stay, I realized I wasn't just dealing with an extended house guest. I was living with a woman who had no intention of leaving, and a husband who was perfectly happy to let his mother run our lives. By month 4, I had completely lost control of my own home. Patricia wasn't just staying with us anymore, she was running the show. She had taken over the kitchen entirely, declaring that she needed to be on a special diet for her health, and that meant controlling all our meals. She'd wake up early to start cooking, filling the house with the smell of overly salted food and vegetables boiled until they were colorless mush. "Louise, sweetie," she'd say when I'd try to cook something for myself, "you really shouldn't be eating so much processed food. No wonder you're having trouble getting pregnant. A woman's body needs proper nutrition." Then she'd launch into a lecture about fertility and diet that somehow always ended with her explaining how quickly she'd gotten pregnant with David. She had opinions about everything. My job was too stressful for a woman trying to conceive. My clothes were too tight and probably affecting my circulation. My housekeeping wasn't thorough enough. She'd run her finger along surfaces and tusk disapprovingly at dust I couldn't even see. She even criticized the way I folded laundry, insisting that David's shirts needed to be done a specific way to avoid wrinkles. The most infuriating part was watching David's response to all of this. Instead of the partner I'd married, I was living with a man who acted like he was still living in his childhood bedroom. Every morning, Patricia would ask him what he wanted for breakfast, and he'd actually consider the options like he was ordering from a menu. She'd pack his lunch in a paper bag with his name written on it in her careful handwriting, and he'd thank her with a kiss on the cheek like he was 10 years old heading off to school. When I'd try to talk to David about boundaries, he'd get defensive immediately. "She's just trying to help, Louise. She feels useful when she can take care of us. It's not hurting anything." But it was hurting everything. I couldn't have friends over because Patricia would hover and make comments about their appearance or their life choices. I couldn't relax in my own living room because she'd positioned herself as the permanent occupant of her chair, complete with a TV tray table covered in her medications, reading glasses, and tissues. I couldn't even have a private conversation with my husband because she had an uncanny ability to appear whenever we were talking, usually with some urgent need that required David's immediate attention. The breaking point came when I discovered she'd been going through our mail. I caught her sitting at the kitchen table with our bank statements spread out in front of her, making notes in a little notebook. "Patricia, what are you doing with our financial information?" She didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, I was just trying to help you organize your bills, dear. David mentioned that you've been stressed about money with all those medical treatments, and I thought I could help you budget better. You know, when David was young, I managed every penny of our household finances. I'm quite good at finding ways to save money." When I told David about this invasion of privacy, he actually defended her. "She's just trying to help, Louise. Maybe we could use some financial advice right now. Mom's always been good with money." That's when I realized I wasn't just married to David anymore. I was married to David and Patricia, and in that marriage, I was definitely the third wheel. Every decision went through her. Every plan had to consider her needs and preferences. Every conversation somehow became about what Patricia thought or what Patricia needed or what Patricia remembered from when David was younger. I started spending more time at work, staying late just to avoid coming home to a house that no longer felt like mine. I'd sit in my car in the driveway sometimes, steeling myself to walk into my own front door and face whatever new way Patricia had rearranged or criticized or taken over while I was gone. David noticed my absence, but interpreted it all wrong. "Mom mentioned that you seem unhappy lately," he said one evening. "Maybe you should talk to someone. She thinks all the stress from the fertility treatments might be affecting your mood." Even my emotional state was now being filtered through Patricia's interpretation and presented to my husband as her concern for my well-being. I was living in some bizarre alternate reality where my mother-in-law had more influence over my marriage than I did, and my husband thought that was perfectly normal. 6 months into Patricia's temporary stay, I found myself sitting in a divorce lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon, using my lunch break to explore options I never thought I'd need to consider. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Ms. Rodriguez, listened patiently as I explained my situation. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Your husband has essentially moved his mother into your marital home indefinitely. She's taken control of household decisions, and he consistently chooses her comfort over your reasonable requests for boundaries." When she put it like that, it sounded even worse than I thought. I nodded, feeling embarrassed by how clearly dysfunctional my marriage had become. "Mrs. Chen, I've seen this before. Some men never really leave their mother's house emotionally, even when they physically move out. The question is whether your husband is willing to recognize the problem and change, or if he's already made his choice about who comes first in his life." Driving home that day, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. David had made his choice, hadn't he? Every time Patricia criticized me and he stayed silent, he was choosing her. Every time she took over some aspect of our home and he praised her for being helpful, he was choosing her. Every time I asked for support and he told me I was being too sensitive, he was choosing her. I started paying closer attention to David's behavior, and what I saw made me sick. He wasn't just failing to defend me. He was actively seeking Patricia's approval for everything. Before making any decision, even small ones like what to watch on TV or whether to get takeout for dinner, he'd glance at his mother to gauge her reaction. If she frowned, he'd immediately change course. If she smiled, he'd puff up with pride like a little boy who'd just gotten a gold star. One evening, I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. It had been months since we'd had any alone time, and I thought maybe getting away from Patricia's constant presence might help us reconnect. David seemed interested until his mother overheard our conversation. "Oh, you two go ahead," she said in that martyred tone she'd perfected. "I'll just stay here by myself. Don't worry about me. I'll find something in the refrigerator. I hope I can figure out how to work the microwave without David here to help me." Within minutes, David was backpedaling. "Actually, maybe we should just order pizza and stay home. Mom's not feeling well, and I don't like the idea of leaving her alone." I wanted to scream. Patricia wasn't sick. She was manipulative. But David couldn't see it, or didn't want to see it. He was so eager to be the good son that he'd completely forgotten how to be a husband. That night, I lay in bed listening to David and Patricia talking quietly in the kitchen. She was praising him for being so considerate, telling him what a good son he was, how lucky she was to have raised such a caring boy. And David was eating it up, his voice warm and happy in a way it hadn't been when talking to me in months. I realized I wasn't married to a man at all. I was married to a little boy who was still desperately seeking mommy's approval, and I was just the woman who happened to be sharing his bed. The thought made me feel sick and somehow dirty, like I was participating in something fundamentally wrong. The next day, I called Ms. Rodriguez and set up another appointment. I needed to understand my options because I was starting to realize that this wasn't a temporary problem that would resolve itself once Patricia's health improved. This was who David really was. A man who would never prioritize his wife over his mother, who would never fully commit to building an adult relationship because he was too comfortable being taken care of like a child. I found myself looking at other couples when I was out, wondering how many wives were actually married to grown men versus overgrown boys who'd never learned to choose their own family over their family of origin. I started to understand why some women stayed single rather than settling for a man who couldn't cut the apron strings. The saddest part was remembering the man I thought I'd married, confident, independent, ready to build a life with me. That man had been an illusion, and Patricia's presence had revealed the truth. David had never really left home. He'd just temporarily moved his dependence to a different address. Now that Mommy was back, he didn't need to pretend to be grown up anymore. The final straw came during David's birthday dinner, 7 months after Patricia's arrival. She had insisted on hosting it at our house, inviting David's entire extended family, his aunt, uncle, 2 cousins, and their spouses. I offered to help with the menu planning and preparation, but Patricia waved me off with a dismissive smile. "Oh no, dear, you just focus on looking pretty. I want everything to be perfect for my son's special day. And you know how particular I am about my cooking." She spent days preparing David's favorite childhood meals, filling our house with relatives who barely acknowledged my presence. I felt like a stranger at my own husband's birthday party, watching Patricia hold court in my dining room, accepting compliments on the decorations she'd chosen and the food she'd prepared in my kitchen. Everything was going wrong, but I was trying to keep the peace. Then Patricia's sister Margaret started asking about children, the way family members always do at gatherings. "So when are we going to see some little ones running around? You two have been married long enough?" I felt my face flush, but before I could respond, Patricia jumped in with her own commentary. "Well, Margaret, some women just aren't naturally maternal. You know, Louise is very focused on her career, and with all the stress she puts on herself, it's no wonder her body isn't cooperating. I keep telling David that maybe they should just accept that some couples aren't meant to have children." The room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could see the mixture of pity and judgment on their faces. But what made it infinitely worse was watching David's reaction. Instead of defending me, instead of shutting down his mother's cruel commentary, he actually nodded along. "Mom's probably right," he said, avoiding my eyes. "We've been trying for a while and Louise gets really stressed about it. Maybe it's just not meant to be." I sat there in stunned silence as Patricia continued, encouraged by David's agreement. And honestly, Louise has never been very good at managing the household anyway. Just last week, I had to reorganize the entire pantry because she had no system at all. Can you imagine trying to raise children in such chaos? Sometimes I think God knows best. David laughed. Actually laughed at his mother's assessment of my failings as a potential mother and wife. His aunt chuckled too, nodding as if this was perfectly reasonable dinner conversation. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to be my family, who were treating my fertility struggles and my competence as sources of entertainment. "Louise is lucky she has me here to help," Patricia continued, really warming up to her audience now. "I don't know how she managed before I moved in. The poor thing was so overwhelmed. trying to work full-time and maintain a house. David was practically living on takeout and wrinkled shirts. More laughter from the family, more agreement from my husband. I felt like I was disappearing, like my entire identity was being erased and rewritten by this woman who had systematically taken over every aspect of my life. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Patricia overstaying her welcome or David being too passive to set boundaries. This was about a fundamental lack of respect for me as a person, as a wife, as a woman deserving of basic dignity. David wasn't just failing to defend me, he was actively participating in my humiliation, using me as a source of bonding material with his mother. I excused myself from the table and went to our bedroom, where I could hear them continuing the conversation without me. They moved on to discussing David's work, his hobbies, his plans for the weekend, everything that apparently mattered, now that the entertainment value of mocking his wife had been exhausted. I sat on the edge of our bed, looking at this room that no longer felt like mine, in this house that had been systematically taken from me, listening to my husband laugh with his family about what a disappointment I was. And I realized that I was done. Not just tired, not just frustrated, not just hopeful that things would eventually get better. I was completely, utterly done with all of it. That night, after the last guest had left and Patricia had finally gone to bed, I waited for David to apologize, to explain, to show some recognition of how badly he'd hurt me. Instead, he thanked me for being such a good sport about his mother's jokes and told me how happy it made him to see his family getting along so well. I knew then that tomorrow would be my last day in this house. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While David was at work and Patricia was at her weekly doctor's appointment, one of the few times she actually left the house, I moved with a purpose I didn't know I still possessed. I packed only what I needed: clothes, important documents, a few personal items that mattered to me. Everything else could stay with the life I was leaving behind. I arranged for a storage unit and a temporary apartment across town, made phone calls to change my address, and withdrew half of our savings. Exactly what I was legally entitled to. The divorce papers were already prepared, signed, and ready. Ms. Rodriguez had advised me to serve them properly, but I had a different plan. This wasn't just about legal proceedings. This was about making a statement that couldn't be misunderstood or minimized. I left the papers on David's pillow, along with a note that I'd rewritten 3 times to get exactly right. Since you already have a woman running your life, you don't need to. I hope you and Patricia are very happy together. Maybe now you can finally move back into your childhood bedroom where you've always belonged. Don't contact me. My lawyer will handle everything from here. I walked through the house one last time, looking at the space that Patricia had systematically transformed to suit her tastes and needs. The furniture arranged for her comfort, the kitchen organized according to her preferences, the decorations she'd chosen to replace mine. David had let her erase me from our home long before I decided to leave. By the time David came home that evening, I was already settled in my temporary apartment, 30 minutes away but feeling like another world entirely. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine, sitting in blessed silence for the first time in 7 months. No one was going to criticize my wine choice, or suggest I shouldn't be drinking because of my fertility issues, or launch into a story about how much better their wine was back in their day. I thought I'd feel sad, or scared, or uncertain about what I was doing. Instead, I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like myself again. Not the diminished, constantly criticized version of myself I'd become, but the woman I used to be before I started accepting scraps of respect from a man who was supposed to love and protect me. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and logistics. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, finding a permanent apartment, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during the months when bringing anyone home meant subjecting them to Patricia's judgment. I started remembering what it felt like to make decisions without having to consider someone else's mother's opinion. My friends were shocked when I told them what had happened. We knew things were difficult, my best friend Lisa said, but we had no idea it was that bad. You seemed so small whenever we saw you those last few months, like you were trying not to take up space. That's exactly what I'd been doing, making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate Patricia's growing presence in my life and David's shrinking respect for our marriage. I'd been disappearing incrementally so gradually that I almost didn't notice until I was barely there at all. 3 weeks after I left, I drove by our old house out of curiosity. Patricia's car was still in the driveway. The garden I'd once cared for was overgrown with weeds. The paint on the front door was chipping. It looked like a house where no one was taking care of things, which, I realized, was probably accurate. David had his mother to take care of him, but who was taking care of the adult responsibilities he'd been avoiding? I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt sorry for the woman I used to be, who had convinced herself that love meant accepting less and less until there was almost nothing left. I felt proud of the woman I was becoming, who had finally said enough and walked away from a situation that was never going to improve. For the first time in months, I was excited about my future. A future that belonged entirely to me, where my opinions mattered, and my needs were considered, and my dignity was non-negotiable. It felt like coming back to life after a long illness, like remembering who I was before I lost myself in a marriage to a man who never grew up. Living alone for the first time in my adult life was like discovering I had superpowers I never knew existed. I could eat dinner at 10 o'clock at night if I wanted to. I could leave dishes in the sink without someone commenting on my housekeeping standards. I could watch whatever I wanted on television without negotiating or enduring passive-aggressive sighs about my choices. The silence was intoxicating. No one was analyzing my every move, criticizing my decisions, or offering unwanted advice about how I should be living my life. I started remembering what it felt like to trust my own judgment, to make choices based on what I wanted, rather than what would avoid conflict or criticism. I redecorated my new apartment exactly the way I'd always wanted our house to look. Bright colors, plants everywhere, art that made me happy instead of tasteful neutrals that offended no one. I hung photos of my friends and family, bought books that interested me, and filled my space with things that reflected who I actually was, rather than who someone else thought I should be. The most amazing discovery was how competent I actually was when no one was constantly undermining my confidence. I handled the divorce proceedings efficiently, managed my finances without Patricia's helpful oversight, and even learned to fix a few things around the apartment that would have required David's immediate consultation with his mother in our old life. I started going out with friends again, accepting invitations I would have declined before, because bringing anyone home meant subjecting them to Patricia's judgment and David's awkward attempts to please everyone simultaneously. My social life came back to life, and I realized how isolated I'd become during those months of walking on eggshells in my own home. Work became more fulfilling too. Without the constant stress of going home to conflict and criticism, I had energy to focus on projects I'd been neglecting. My colleagues noticed the change, commenting that I seemed more confident and engaged. I even got promoted to a position I'd been hoping for but hadn't felt ready to pursue while my personal life was in chaos. But the biggest change was internal. I stopped second-guessing myself constantly. I stopped mentally rehearsing conversations to avoid triggering someone's disapproval. I stopped making myself smaller to make others more comfortable. I remembered what it felt like to take up space unapologetically, to have opinions without immediately doubting them, to exist without constantly seeking approval. Dating wasn't even on my radar yet, but I found myself noticing things about other relationships that I'd never paid attention to before. I watched couples in restaurants and grocery stores, observing the dynamics between them. Some women looked exhausted, constantly managing their partner's moods and needs. Others looked confident and secure, comfortable in partnerships where both people seemed to respect each other. I realized I'd never had the second kind of relationship with David, even in our best times. There had always been an undercurrent of me working to earn his attention and approval, of managing his emotions and making things easy for him. I'd mistaken that emotional labor for love, thinking that's what wives were supposed to do. Now I understood the difference between a partnership and a caretaking arrangement. I'd been David's emotional manager, trying to keep him happy and comfortable while neglecting my own needs. When Patricia arrived, she simply took over that role, and David seamlessly transferred his dependence from me to her without ever learning to depend on himself. 6 months after leaving, I barely recognized the woman I'd been during the final year of my marriage. That woman had been anxious, defensive, constantly trying to prove her worth to people who had already decided she was lacking. This woman, the one I was becoming, was calm, decisive, and completely uninterested in anyone's approval except her own. I wasn't bitter about David or even angry at Patricia anymore. They were perfect for each other. He needed someone to make all his decisions and manage his emotional life, and she needed someone to control and fuss over. I had been the obstacle to their perfect codependent relationship, and removing myself had probably made both of them happier. The revelation was liberating. I didn't have to fix David or teach him to be an adult. I didn't have to prove my worth to Patricia or win some imaginary competition for his loyalty. I could simply be myself, a complete, capable woman who didn't need anyone else's approval to feel valuable. Friends started commenting on how different I seemed. "You're glowing," my colleague Sarah said during lunch one day. "There's something lighter about you, like you're not carrying some invisible weight anymore." She was right. I had been carrying the weight of constantly trying to earn love and respect that should have been freely given. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me, without elaborate explanations or apologies. I stopped over-explaining my choices or seeking validation for my decisions. I discovered that I actually had excellent instincts when I trusted them instead of constantly doubting myself to avoid conflict. The woman I was becoming wouldn't have tolerated Patricia's behavior for 7 days, let alone 7 months. She wouldn't have married a man who needed his mother's permission to make adult decisions. She wouldn't have spent years trying to love someone into maturity. But I didn't regret being that woman for a while. She had taught me exactly what I never wanted to accept again. 8 months after I left, I was trying to recover some old photos from a cloud account I'd forgotten about when I accidentally opened an email folder I thought I'd deleted. What I found there made me sit down hard in my kitchen chair, staring at my laptop screen in disbelief. There were 47 emails from David, starting just 3 days after I'd left. The first few were angry, demanding that I come home immediately and stop this ridiculous tantrum. He accused me of being selfish and dramatic, of abandoning our marriage over minor disagreements about his mother's visit. But as I scrolled through the messages, watching the timestamps span across months, I'd been blissfully unaware of his attempts to contact me. The tone changed dramatically. By week 3, the anger had shifted to confusion. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Mom says she was only trying to help, and I thought we were handling everything fine." Month 2 brought the first hints of desperation. "Louise, please just call me back. Let's talk about this like adults. I know we can work things out if you'll just come home and we can discuss this rationally." He was still framing it as my problem to solve, my responsibility to return and fix what I had broken by leaving. But somewhere around month 4, something shifted. "I've been thinking about what you said in your note, and maybe I haven't been seeing things clearly. Could we at least meet for coffee? I miss talking to you." For the first time, he sounded less certain that I was the one who needed to change. The emails from months 5 and 6 were harder to read. David had apparently started therapy, something I'd suggested years earlier that he'd dismissed as unnecessary. My therapist helped me understand some things about boundaries and family dynamics. "I think I owe you an apology, but I want to give it to you in person." By month 7, he was writing things I'd waited years to hear. I asked Mom to move back to her own place. It wasn't easy, and she's not happy with me, but I realize now that I should have done it months ago. I should have protected our marriage instead of making you feel like an outsider in your own home. The most recent emails from just 2 weeks ago were almost heartbreaking in their honesty. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I finally understand what I lost. I wasn't being a husband to you. I was still being a son first, and that wasn't fair to either of us. I've been learning to make decisions without asking for Mom's opinion, and it's scary but also liberating." I sat there reading message after message of David apparently becoming the man I'd always hoped he could be, but only after I'd left him. He wrote about setting boundaries with Patricia, about realizing how much he'd depended on both of us to manage his emotional life, about understanding why I'd felt so alone in our marriage. "I keep wanting to call you when something good happens at work, or when I figure out how to fix something around the house by myself, or when I stand up to Mom about something. I want to tell you that I'm learning to be the kind of man who deserves a partner like you, but I know it's too late for us." The last email, sent just 5 days ago, was the shortest and somehow the most devastating. "I signed the divorce papers today. I hope you're happy, Louise. I really mean that. You deserve to be happy, and I'm sorry it took losing you for me to grow up. I'll always love you." I closed the laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the life I'd built without him. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd been right that David could change, that he could learn to be an independent adult. But I'd also been right that it would only happen if I stopped enabling his immaturity by accepting it. The timing felt cruel. Here was evidence that David had finally done the work I'd begged him to do for years, had finally prioritized our marriage over his mother's comfort, had finally started becoming the partner I'd needed him to be, and it had only happened after I'd given up and walked away. But as I sat with those feelings, I realized something important. The fact that David could change didn't mean I owed him the chance to prove it to me. The fact that he'd finally grown up didn't erase the years of feeling invisible and unimportant in my own marriage. The fact that he missed me now didn't obligate me to return to a relationship that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. I felt sad for both of us, for the timing, for the lost years, for the woman I'd been who had tried so hard to love someone into maturity. But I didn't feel regret about leaving. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and some growth only happens when comfortable situations become uncomfortable enough to force change. I couldn't stop thinking about those emails, so I did something I probably shouldn't have. I read them all again, more carefully this time. The progression was even clearer on the second reading. David's journey from anger to self-awareness was documented in painful detail across 8 months of messages I'd never seen. In month 3, he'd written about Patricia finally going home, but framed it as her decision. Mom decided she was feeling better and wanted to get back to her own routine. By month 5, he was more honest. I had to ask Mom to leave. She wasn't happy about it, and she's been calling every day to complain about how ungrateful I am. But I'm starting to understand why you felt so unwelcome in our own house. The financial struggles he mentioned were eye-opening. Without me contributing to household expenses and without Patricia managing everything, David had apparently struggled to keep up with basic responsibilities. I never realized how much you handled that I just took for granted. The bills, the scheduling, the planning. I thought it all just happened automatically. He wrote about therapy sessions where his counselor helped him recognize patterns he'd never noticed. Dr. Martinez asked me to describe a typical conversation between you, me, and Mom. And when I said it out loud, I could hear how often I asked for Mom's opinion instead of discussing things with you. I could hear how I'd dismiss your concerns by saying you were being too sensitive instead of actually listening to what you were telling me. The most revealing emails were about his relationship with Patricia after I left. Mom keeps asking when you're coming back, and when I tell her we're getting divorced, she says it's probably for the best because you were never right for me anyway. Hearing her say that made me realize she was never trying to help our marriage. She was trying to prove that no woman could take care of me like she can. He described setting boundaries that I'd begged him to establish years earlier. I told Mom she can't just drop by without calling first, and she cried and said I was choosing strangers over family. It took me this long to understand that choosing my wife over my mother isn't betraying family. It's creating my own family. David had apparently gone through our old photo albums and found pictures from our early years together. I was looking at photos from our first apartment, and I could see how happy you looked. Then I found pictures from the last 2 years, and your smile looks forced in every single one. I did that to you. I let Mom do that to you. I'm so sorry. Louise. The emails revealed other changes too. He'd started cooking for himself, learning to do laundry properly, managing his own schedule without Patricia's input. Yesterday, I made a decision about refinancing the house without asking anyone's opinion, and then I realized it was the first major choice I've made independently in years. It felt terrifying and amazing at the same time. But the most heartbreaking part was reading about his loneliness and regret. I thought having Mom around made me feel loved and supported, but really it just made me feel like a child. Being alone in this house is hard, but it's also teaching me to be comfortable with my own company. I never learned that before. I always needed someone taking care of me. In his most recent emails, David wrote about understanding why I'd had to leave so dramatically instead of trying to work things out gradually. Dr. Martinez explained that some people only change when the consequences become impossible to ignore. You tried to talk to me for years, but I kept minimizing your concerns because I could. You had to show me what losing you actually meant before I'd take it seriously. He'd apparently had several difficult conversations with Patricia about boundaries and respect. Mom finally admitted that she never thought you were good enough for me, and that she was trying to prove you couldn't handle being a wife and mother. She said she was protecting me from making a mistake. I told her that the only mistake I made was not protecting you from her. Reading about David's growth should have made me happy. It meant I'd been right about his potential. Right that he could become the partner I'd needed him to be. But instead, it made me incredibly sad. All of this self-awareness, all of this emotional maturity, all of these changes I desperately wanted, they'd only come after I'd given up and left. The timing felt like the cruelest irony. Here was proof that David could learn and grow and change, but only after he'd lost the person who'd believed in his potential the most. He'd become the man I'd always known he could be. But for someone else's future, not for our marriage. A year and 2 months after I'd left, I was grocery shopping in my new neighborhood when I ran into Tom, a colleague of David's from his old job. I'd always liked Tom. He was one of the few people from David's work life who'd treated me like an individual rather than just David's wife. Louise, I thought that was you, he said, approaching my cart with a surprised smile. How are you doing? You look great. I thanked him, and we chatted briefly about work and life. Then, inevitably, he asked about David. I heard you guys separated. I'm sorry. I always thought you two seemed happy together. We're divorced now, I said simply. It was the right decision for both of us. Tom nodded, looking a bit uncomfortable. Well, he's having a rough time. I saw him a few weeks ago at a coffee shop downtown, and he looked pretty rough around the edges. I wasn't sure if I should say anything to you. After Tom left, I couldn't shake the image of David looking rough around the edges. Despite everything, I didn't want him to be suffering. I wanted him to be okay, to have learned from our marriage and moved on to build something healthier with someone else. 3 days later, I got my answer about Tom's comment. I was coming home from work when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the steps of my apartment building. David looked up as I approached, and Tom hadn't been exaggerating. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Hi, Louise." His voice was quiet, uncertain. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to see you. Just once." I stood there holding my work bag, looking at this man I'd been married to for 8 years, feeling like I was seeing a stranger. "How did you find where I live?" "Tom mentioned he'd seen you in this neighborhood. I know it's wrong to just show up like this, but you changed your number and blocked me on social media. I needed to apologize in person. I could have told him to leave. I should have told him to leave. Instead, I found myself sitting down on the steps next to him, maintaining careful distance between us. You have 10 minutes. David took a shaky breath. I read your note again yesterday, the one you left with the divorce papers. About me already having a woman running my life. You were right. I wasn't married to you. I was still married to my mother, and I expected you to just accept being the other woman in my own marriage. He talked about therapy, about the painful process of recognizing how he'd failed as a husband. He told me about Patricia's angry reaction when he'd finally set boundaries, how she'd accused him of being ungrateful and weak. She said you'd brainwashed me against my own family. It took me 6 months to realize that standing up for my wife against anyone, even my mother, isn't betrayal. It's what husbands are supposed to do. David, I interrupted gently, I'm glad you've learned these things. I really am. But I know it's too late, he said quickly. I know I destroyed something that can't be fixed. I'm not here to ask you to come back. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I lost and why you had to leave the way you did. We sat in silence for a moment. Then David pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. These are the final divorce papers. I signed them. I also wanted to give you this. He handed me a check. It's your half of the house equity. I sold it last month. I looked at the check, surprised by the amount. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. You put just as much into that house as I did, even though only my name was on the deed. That was another way I failed you, making you feel like a guest in your own home. He stood up slowly. I won't bother you again, Louise. I just wanted you to know that losing you taught me how to be the kind of man who might deserve love someday. Maybe not yours, but someone's. As he walked away, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and closure. This was the David I'd always believed existed underneath the boy who'd never learned to choose his wife over his mother. But seeing him now, mature and self-aware and finally taking responsibility for his choices, only confirmed that I'd made the right decision in leaving. Some people can only learn through loss. Some growth only happens when the comfortable option disappears. David had become the man I'd always hoped he could be, but only after he'd lost the woman who'd believed in that potential the most. 2 years after I left David, I'm sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a Sunday morning, reading a book and enjoying the kind of peaceful weekend that once seemed impossible. The woman I am now barely recognizes the woman who used to tiptoe around her own house, constantly managing other people's emotions and needs while neglecting her own. I never did remarry, though I dated someone wonderful for about 8 months. Marcus was everything David hadn't been, confident without being arrogant, independent without being distant, respectful of my boundaries and opinions. But when he started talking about moving in together, I realized I wasn't ready to risk my hard-won peace for anyone, no matter how great they seemed. Maybe someday I'll be ready for that kind of partnership again, but for now, I'm completely content with the life I've built for myself. My career flourished once I stopped pouring all my emotional energy into a marriage that was draining me. I got 2 more promotions and now manage a team of 12 people. My colleagues often comment on my calm confidence and decision-making skills, qualities that were always there but had been buried under years of second-guessing myself to avoid conflict at home. I bought my own house 6 months ago, using David's equity payment as a down payment. It's smaller than our old house, but perfect for me. Lots of windows, a garden where I grow vegetables and flowers, and every single thing in it chosen because I love it, not because it won't offend anyone. I host dinner parties for my friends, travel when I want to, and make decisions based entirely on what feels right to me. As for David, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he eventually started dating someone new, a teacher named Rachel who apparently has no patience for his mother's interference. Tom mentioned that Patricia tried her usual tactics with Rachel, but Rachel shut them down immediately, and David actually supported her. "It's like he finally learned to be a husband," Tom said, sounding surprised. "I'm genuinely happy for David. He needed to learn those lessons. And I'm glad he found someone who benefited from the growth that came too late for our marriage. But I also know that his transformation only happened because I left. If I'd stayed, if I'd continued to accept his mother's dominance and his emotional immaturity, nothing would have changed. Some people only grow when their comfortable patterns become impossible to maintain." Patricia, according to the same mutual friends, was furious about losing her control over David's life. She apparently told everyone who would listen that I'd turned her son against his own family, never acknowledging that David had simply learned to prioritize his wife over his mother, something most men figure out before they get married. She tried the same manipulative tactics with Rachel that she'd used with me, but found herself dealing with someone who had clear boundaries from day one. The most important thing I learned from my marriage and divorce is that love isn't enough if it's not paired with respect, maturity, and genuine partnership. I'd spent years thinking that if I just loved David enough, if I was patient enough and understanding enough, he'd eventually become the husband I needed him to be. But you can't love someone into growing up. They have to want to do that work themselves. I also learned that leaving doesn't make you a quitter. Sometimes it makes you a woman who finally understands her own worth. There's a difference between fighting for a relationship and fighting for scraps of respect from someone who's shown you repeatedly that you're not their priority. I fought for 8 years. And when I finally stopped fighting and started walking, everything in my life got better. To any woman reading this who recognizes herself in my story, you deserve to be someone's first choice, not their consolation prize. You deserve a partner who protects your relationship from outside interference, who considers your feelings and decisions, who makes you feel valued rather than tolerated. You deserve to feel at home in your own life. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to want more. Don't stay in situations that require you to make yourself smaller to keep the peace. Don't accept that's just how he is as an excuse for behavior that hurts you. And don't let anyone convince you that your standards are too high when all you're asking for is basic respect and consideration. Some relationships can be saved with communication and compromise. Others need to end so everyone involved can learn to be better versions of themselves. The key is knowing the difference and having the courage to act on that knowledge even when it's terrifying. I'm not bitter about those 8 years with David. They taught me what I need in a relationship and what I'll never accept again. They showed me that I'm stronger than I thought and more capable of independence than I'd ever imagined. They led me to this life I've built, where every day belongs to me and every choice reflects my values and desires. That's not settling for less. That's finally understanding that I was always enough, exactly as I am.